The impossible equation. The emergency klaxons echoed through the corridors of Deep Space Research Station Omega-7 as scientists and military personnel rushed between laboratories and control centers. The massive orbital platform hung in space, like a metallic flower, its research arms extending toward the dying red giant star that dominated the viewports. But today, the star was the least of their worries. Admiral Vex Thera of the Zephyrian fleet stood before the main holographic display, her scaled hands clasped behind her back as she surveyed the catastrophic data streaming across the screens. Her species had ruled the Outer Rim territories for over 3,000 years, and their technology was considered among the most advanced in the known galaxy. Yet here she was, watching helplessly as reality itself began to unravel. The quantum mirror array stretched across 17 light-minutes of space, a testament to the engineering prowess of the long-extinct architect civilization. For millennia, these mirrors had regulated the fundamental forces of space-time in this sector, preventing the collapse of stellar systems and maintaining the delicate balance that allowed life to flourish across dozens of worlds. Now, one by one, the mirrors were failing. Professor Kill-Andra floated near the central console, her ethereal form shimmering as she manipulated complex mathematical equations with her thought tendrils. The Etherians had transcended physical form centuries ago, becoming beings of pure energy and intellect. If anyone could solve this crisis, it should have been her. Yet for the past 72 hours, even her vast computational abilities had proven insufficient. The quantum resonance patterns are becoming increasingly erratic, she announced, her voice like musical chimes in the minds of those present. Each mirror failure creates cascading instabilities in the surrounding array. At this rate, we have perhaps 18 hours before complete systematic collapse. Dr. Morius, the lead mathematician, from the Crystalline Collective, rotated his geometric form to face the group. His people were living crystals who processed information at speeds that made quantum computers seem sluggish. His faceted surface caught the light from the displays, creating rainbow patterns across the laboratory walls. I have run 2.4 billion theoretical calculations through our most advanced quantum processing matrices, he stated, his voice resonating like struck crystal. The stabilization equations required to restore the array's functionality exist beyond our current mathematical framework. The architects clearly operated on principles that transcend our understanding of quantum mechanics. Admiral Vex Thera's tail lashed with frustration. Her people had conquered half the galaxy through superior technology and tactical brilliance, yet they stood powerless before this ancient puzzle. How is this possible? The combined intellectual resources of 4 civilizations, and we cannot solve what amounts to an engineering problem? The truth was more troubling than she wanted to admit. The quantum mirrors weren't simply machines. They were manifestations of the architect's mastery over the fundamental forces of reality. The ancient civilization had disappeared millions of years ago, leaving behind only their incredible constructions and tantalizing hints of technology that seemed to border on magic. Dr. Morius projected a 3-dimensional model of the failing array into the center of the room. The crystalline structure rotated slowly, showing the cascade of failures spreading like a virus through the network of mirrors. Red indicators marked the dead units, yellow showed those approaching critical instability, and the few remaining. Green signals grew fewer by the hour. The pattern of failures suggests that the array is designed with built-in redundancies, Professor Kill-Andra observed, her form brightening as she focused her considerable intellect on the problem. However, these redundancies appear to be failing in sequence rather than random. This implies either a fundamental design flaw or we're missing something crucial about how the system operates, Admiral Vex Thera finished grimly. Something the architects took for granted but which remains invisible to us. The station shuddered slightly as another quantum mirror failed, sending ripples of distorted space-time through the local area. The artificial gravity fluctuated for a moment, causing several technicians to grab onto nearby surfaces for stability. Outside the viewports, space itself seemed to shimmer and bend, like looking through disturbed water. Dr. Morius updated his calculations in real time, his crystalline form pulsing with computational activity. Each failure reduces our available time exponentially. The quantum cascade is accelerating. We now have approximately 14 hours before the array reaches the point of no return. Professor Kilandra's form dimmed with frustration. I have consulted the archives of 17 different civilizations. I have applied quantum field theory, string mathematics, and even experimental frameworks that exist only in theoretical space. Yet the solution remains elusive. It is as if the architects were working with completely different laws of physics. The implications were staggering. If the quantum mirror array collapsed completely, the gravitational and quantum distortions would tear apart the local star system within days. The red giant would collapse into a black hole, and the resulting gravitational waves would destabilize neighboring systems. Billions of lives hung in the balance. Admiral Vexithara accessed her communication systems, opening channels to military commands across the sector. All evacuation fleets, maintain ready status. If we cannot solve this crisis, within the next 12 hours we will need to begin emergency relocations of all inhabited worlds within 50 light years. The scope of such an evacuation was almost incomprehensible. Entire civilizations would need to abandon their homeworlds, carrying what they could while leaving behind millennia of history and culture. It would be the largest displacement of sentient life in galactic history. "Admiral," came a voice from the communication station. "We're receiving a priority transmission from Earth Command. They're requesting permission to send a representative." Vexithara's scaled features twisted into what might have been amusement among her people. The humans? What possible contribution could they make to this situation? Their species has barely achieved reliable faster-than-light travel. Professor Kilandra's form pulsed thoughtfully. Perhaps a fresh perspective might prove valuable. We have been approaching this problem from within our established frameworks. An external viewpoint could potentially reveal angles we have overlooked. Dr. Morius rotated to face the group, his faceted surface reflecting their images in fragmented patterns. The humans do possess certain unconventional problem-solving methodologies. Their approach to engineering often defies logical progression, yet somehow achieves functional results. Admiral Vexithara considered this for a moment. Time was running. Short and conventional wisdom had failed them completely. Perhaps desperation was sufficient justification for entertaining even the most unlikely possibilities. "Very well," she decided. "Inform Earth Command that they may send their representative. However, make it clear that we cannot delay our primary efforts to accommodate their limitations." 3 hours later, a small human transport ship docked with the research station. The vessel was unremarkable by galactic standards, its design functional rather than elegant, with visible maintenance patches and modifications that spoke of practical engineering over aesthetic concerns. Captain Sarah Chen stepped through the airlock, carrying nothing more than a standard data tablet and a worn toolkit that looked like it belonged in a museum rather than on a cutting-edge research station. She was of medium height with short dark hair, wearing a simple blue jumpsuit that marked her as an engineer rather than a scientist or military officer. The assembled alien dignitaries regarded her with expressions ranging from polite skepticism to barely concealed disdain. She represented a species that had only recently joined the galactic community, whose technology was primitive by current standards, and whose understanding of advanced physics was rudimentary at best. "Captain Chen," Admiral Vexithara said formally, "welcome to Deep Space Research Station Omega-7. I trust you have been briefed on our current situation?" Sarah nodded, glancing around the impressive laboratory with its holographic displays and exotic technology. "Yes, ma'am. Quantum mirror array failure, cascade effect, potential system-wide collapse. I've reviewed the technical specifications during my journey." Professor Kilandra's form brightened with what might have been curiosity. "Captain, I must ask what qualifications you possess that might enable you to contribute to this crisis. The mathematics involved operate at levels that challenge even our most advanced computational systems." Sarah smiled, setting down her simple toolkit next to the sophisticated alien equipment. "Well, I'm not a mathematician or a quantum physicist, I'm just an engineer. I fix things that are broken." Dr. Morius's crystalline form chimed with what sounded like amusement. "Captain Chen, This is not a mechanical failure that can be resolved with tools and intuition. We are dealing with quantum field dynamics that exist at the intersection of space-time and probability matrices. Maybe, Sarah said, approaching the holographic display showing the failing array. But in my experience, complex problems sometimes have simple solutions. Mind if I take a look at the actual failure data rather than the theoretical models? The aliens exchanged glances that conveyed volumes about their expectations for this consultation. However, time was running short, and they had little to lose by humoring the human representative. Of course, Admiral Vexthara said graciously, though I should warn you that we have already analyzed every aspect of the system's performance data, the pattern of failures appears to be completely random. Sarah studied the holographic display for several minutes, occasionally asking for different data views or historical performance records. Her questions were basic, focusing on operational parameters rather than the complex theoretical frameworks the aliens had been exploring. As she worked, the station continued to shudder with each new mirror failure. The countdown continued relentlessly toward catastrophe, while the greatest minds of 4 civilizations watched a human engineer examine their data with what appeared to be childlike curiosity. The fate of billions hung in the balance, and time was running out. The human solution. The hours ticked by with agonizing slowness as Sarah Chen continued her examination of the quantum mirror array data. The alien scientists had returned to their own analyses, working with increasing desperation as their sophisticated models failed to yield solutions. Meanwhile, the human engineer sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by holographic displays showing raw operational data rather than the complex theoretical projections her colleagues preferred. Admiral Vexthara paced the laboratory with barely contained anxiety. Each status update brought worse news. The cascade failures were accelerating, and their evacuation fleets were already moving into position around the most vulnerable worlds. Entire civilizations were preparing to abandon their homes based on the assumption that the galaxy's greatest minds could not solve this crisis. "Captain Chen," she said finally, unable to keep the strain from her voice. "Perhaps you should review our theoretical models. Dr. Morius has computed over 3 billion possible stabilization sequences." Sarah looked up from a display showing power distribution patterns across the array. "I appreciate that, Admiral, but I think I'm seeing something different here. Your models assume the mirrors are failing randomly, right?" Professor Killandra's ethereal form shimmered with attention. "The failure pattern appears random, yes. We have found no correlation between mirror positions, age, or operational parameters that would predict which units fail next." "That's just it," Sarah said, standing up and gesturing to the holographic array. "They're not failing randomly at all. Look at this." She manipulated the display, highlighting the sequence of failures over time. Instead of showing the complex quantum field equations the aliens had been studying, she displayed simple operational statistics, power consumption, heat generation, and basic structural stress indicators. "See this pattern? Every mirror that's failed was running at exactly 97.3% of its rated capacity when it went offline. Not 97.2%, not 97.4%, exactly 97.3%. That's not a failure threshold, that's a safety shutdown." Dr. Morius rotated his crystalline form to examine the data more closely. "Impossible. We would have detected such an obvious pattern in our initial analysis." "You would have, if you'd been looking at operational data instead of quantum mathematics," Sarah replied gently. "The mirrors aren't breaking down. They're turning themselves off to prevent something worse from happening." The implications hit the alien scientists like a physical blow. If Sarah was correct, then they had been approaching the problem from entirely the wrong direction. Instead of trying to force the failing mirrors back online, they needed to understand why the array's own safety systems were activating. Admiral Vexthara felt a flutter of hope for the first time in days. "Captain Chen, if you are correct about this safety protocol, what is the array trying to prevent?" Sarah was already pulling up historical data, her fingers flying across the holographic interface with surprising skill. "That's the beautiful part. The architects built this system to be self-regulating. When local spacetime gets too unstable, the mirrors shut down in sequence to prevent a cascade collapse that would be much worse than what we're seeing now. She highlighted a section of the display showing gravitational fluctuations around the dying red giant. Your star is approaching its final collapse phase. The gravitational waves it's producing are interfering with the quantum field stability that the mirrors depend on. The array is shutting down sections of itself to maintain overall system integrity. Professor Killandra's form brightened with understanding. Then the solution is not to force the mirrors back online, but to compensate for the gravitational interference. Exactly, Sarah said, her excitement growing. But here's where it gets interesting. The architects didn't just build a quantum mirror array. They built it around a natural phenomenon that they could use as a gravitational lens to focus and stabilize the quantum fields. She pulled up a three-dimensional map of the local space, showing the positions of the mirrors in relation to the red giant and several smaller celestial bodies. What had appeared to be a simple geometric arrangement suddenly revealed itself as something far more elegant. Look at this. The mirrors aren't just reflecting quantum energy back and forth. They're using the star's gravity well as a focusing mechanism. As the star changes, the focal points shift, and the mirrors have to compensate. But the compensation system is designed around the star's stable mass, not its collapse phase. Dr. Morius processed this information with the speed of crystalline computation. If your analysis is correct, then we need to modify the array's gravitational compensation algorithms to account for the star's changing mass distribution. Not modify, Sarah said with a grin. Reset. The architects built this system to handle stellar collapse, but they designed it to be manually activated when the time came. The automatic systems only handle normal operational variations. You accessed a section of the control interface that the aliens had dismissed as historical archive data. Ancient architect symbols filled the display, but Sarah was studying them with the focused attention of an engineer reading a technical manual. Captain Chen, Admiral Vexathera said carefully, you cannot possibly read architect script. The language has been dead for millions of years. I can't read it, Sarah admitted, but I can understand it. Engineering documentation follows similar patterns regardless of who writes it. Status indicators, warning symbols, operational procedures. They're all here, hidden in what you guys thought was decorative script. She highlighted a series of symbols that repeated throughout the interface. This symbol appears next to every major system component. This one shows up in what look like warning sections. And this one, she pointed to a complex glyph at the center of the display. This one appears in contexts that suggest it means manual override or emergency activation. The alien scientists watched in amazement as Sarah worked through the architect interface using nothing more than engineering, intuition, and pattern recognition. Her approach was completely different from their analytical methods, relying on practical understanding rather than theoretical knowledge. Here, she said finally, her finger hovering over a section of controls that had been inactive for millions of years. This is the manual stellar collapse protocol. The architects expected that eventually the stars their arrays were built around would enter final collapse phase. They just expected someone to be there to activate the emergency systems. When it happened, Professor Killandra's form pulsed with nervous energy. Captain Chen, if you are incorrect about this interface, attempting to activate unknown architect protocols could accelerate the array's collapse rather than preventing it. Sarah nodded seriously. That's true. But if I'm right, and we do nothing, the array fails completely in about 6 hours anyway. Sometimes you have to take calculated risks. Admiral Vexathara made the decision that would be remembered throughout galactic history. Do it. Sarah's hand moved to the control interface, tracing the ancient symbols with careful precision. The moment she touched the central glyph, the entire array responded. Across 17 light minutes of space, quantum mirrors that had been dark for days began to pulse with renewed energy. But instead of simply reactivating, they began to reconfigure themselves. The geometric arrangement that had maintained stellar stability for millions of years shifted into a new pattern, one designed specifically for managing the gravitational chaos of stellar collapse. The mirrors that had shut down to prevent cascade failure came back online. But now they were operating in harmony with the changing gravitational fields instead of fighting against them. The quantum resonance patterns stabilized, and the dangerous space-time distortions began to fade. On Deep Space Research Station Omega-7, every alarm fell silent. The holographic displays showed green status indicators spreading across the array, like a wave of healing. The crisis was over. Dr. Morius was the first to break the stunned silence. Remarkable. The humans solved in hours what we could not accomplish in days, using methods that bypassed our most sophisticated analytical frameworks entirely. Professor Kilandra's form shimmered with what might have been admiration. Captain Chen, how did you know to look for manual override protocols when we had found no evidence of their existence? Sarah packed up her simple toolkit, smiling at the question. Because that's how I would have built it. If you're going to create a system that's supposed to last for millions of years, you build in safeguards for every situation you can imagine. The architects were engineers, just like me. We think alike. Admiral Vexithara approached the human engineer, her bearing formal but her expression showing newfound respect. Captain Chen, on behalf of the Zephyrian Fleet and the Galactic Council, I thank you. Your actions have saved billions of lives. Just doing my job, Sarah replied, though she couldn't hide her pride in the accomplishment. Sometimes the most advanced solution is the simplest one. You were also focused on the complex quantum mathematics that you forgot to check if someone had already solved the problem millions of years ago. As news of the successful resolution spread throughout the galaxy, humanity's status within the galactic community changed overnight. The species that had been dismissed as primitive newcomers had demonstrated capabilities that complemented the advanced civilization's sophisticated approaches to problem-solving. In the weeks that followed, human engineers would find themselves in high demand throughout known space. Their intuitive, practical approach to complex problems proved invaluable when combined with alien theoretical knowledge and advanced technology. But for Sarah Chen, the greatest satisfaction came from a simple realization. No matter how advanced a civilization became, someone still had to know how to fix things when they broke. And sometimes, the person who could do that was the one everyone least expected. The quantum mirror array continued its vigil around the dying star, now properly configured for its final phase of operation. The red giant would eventually collapse into a black hole as stellar physics demanded, but the array would manage the transition safely, protecting the surrounding systems for millions of years to come, just as the architects had planned, waiting patiently for someone to read their instructions and flip the right switch.